Throughout Latin America's history, the first days of November have never been merely about mourning. They were about remembering, about whispering the names of the dead so the wind would carry them back home. Long before the modern parades, the painted skulls, and the music that fills today's Dia de Muertos celebrations, there was quiet. There were hills of adobe and stone, candlelight flickering through the mist, and families murmuring prayers for souls that had once shared their bread and laughter. It was not a season of fear, but of welcome. For in this land, death was never a stranger. The story begins in the 1500s, when Spanish missionaries arrived on the shores of the New World. They brought with them saints, relics, and calendars. And with them, the Feast of All Saints, a solemn day to honor holy souls. But the soil of Mexico and Central America already knew older songs. The Aztecs had long celebrated Micayluitontli, the Feast of the Dead, dedicated to Mictecacihuatl, the Lady of the Underworld, who guarded bones and memories alike. For an entire month, families offered maize, tamales, and flowers so the spirits of their ancestors might eat and be comforted. When Catholicism spread, the two worlds did not clash as much as they intertwined. The priests preached of heaven, purgatory, and salvation. The people quietly kept their offerings for the departed. In the dim glow of candlelight, rosaries mixed with cornmeal. Beneath wooden crosses, small clay idols of gods once worshipped were buried, not as rebellion, but as remembrance. The faith of the old world met the soul of the new, and together they built something luminous, El Día de Todos los Santos, the Day of All Saints. By the 1600s, this fusion had taken root across the colonies. In the mountain villages of Peru, women carried baskets of candles and marigolds, weaving through narrow paths to the cemeteries before dawn. In Guatemala, they brought homemade kites, flying them high so the souls of loved ones could see the way home. The air smelled of copal resin and bread baked for the dead. These were not gestures of mourning, they were gestures of invitation. The departed were not gone. They were simply elsewhere, waiting for a voice to call them. Churches encouraged prayer for souls not yet in heaven. But in the villages, belief went further. Families built small altars inside their homes, ofrendas, adorned with food, flowers, candles, and photographs. They believed that the souls would return that night, guided by the scent of marigolds and candle smoke. The thin veil between worlds fluttered for a brief, holy moment. There are accounts from Jesuit letters describing how deeply intertwined the traditions had become. A missionary in Oaxaca once wrote that the people pray with tears and laughter, eating beside their graves as if at a family feast. In some regions, even the smallest children were brought to cemeteries, their laughter echoing among the tombs. It was believed that joy, not sorrow, would please the spirits, but history, as ever, shifted with faith and politics. By the 18th century, colonial Latin America had become a place of complex identities, indigenous, Spanish, African, all living under the weight of empire. Even the rituals of death reflected that blend. Candles made from European wax burned beside native copal resin. Hymns in Latin mixed with Nahuatl chants. During epidemics, especially the great smallpox outbreaks that tore through Mexico and the Andes, families filled churchyards with offerings for the countless unnamed souls who perished. Death in these moments was not distant. It walked among them, and so they prayed not only for salvation, but for remembrance. As centuries turned, these traditions survived revolutions and pandemics alike. During the cholera waves of the 1800s, whole towns in Central America gathered at dawn to pray for those who died unseen. Cemeteries overflowed, yet families still brought candles, hundreds of them, lighting paths for the souls they could not bury properly. It was said that on All Saints' night, the earth itself glowed from the sheer number of flames. By the 19th century, new winds blew across Latin America. Independence brought freedom from colonial rule, but it also brought a wave of modernism and skepticism. The urban elite looked upon old customs as superstitions of the countryside, yet in those very rural places the old faith endured. In Oaxaca, Chiapas, and Yucatan, villagers still prepared bread shaped like doves and crosses, placed them beside photographs of grandparents, and burned incense to wake the dead. The world was changing fast. Railroads, factories, and newspapers filled the cities. But in the quiet villages, the timeless dialogue between the living and the dead continued, unchanged. It was in the early 20th century that Dia de Todos los Santos, long blended with All Souls' Day, began to transform into what we now know as Dia de Muertos. The poet and printmaker José Guadalupe Posada captured this shift in haunting humor. His calavera etchings, dancing skeletons dressed like aristocrats, mocked the living while celebrating the dead. What began as religious remembrance took on the spirit of satire, art, and national identity. Death in Mexico became democratic. It belonged to all. Even pandemics left their mark. The influenza pandemic of 1918 swept across Latin America, claiming millions. Cemeteries filled beyond capacity, but families still laid flowers and candles at fences, roadsides, even riverbanks. They whispered the same old prayers, that you may find your way home. After the devastation, the holiday became even more sacred, a communal way to heal the invisible wounds left by so much loss. As the 20th century unfolded, migration and modernization spread the traditions beyond their original regions. In the sugarcane towns of Colombia, people adapted the customs by holding night vigils with guitars and hymns. In Bolivia, families left bread ladders and miniature foods for wandering souls. In Ecuador, the colada morada, a thick, purple drink made with berries, spices and maize, became a symbol of reunion with the dead, shared by the whole family. Each country spoke the same language of remembrance, though in its own dialect of devotion. The mid-century saw another transformation, the rise of the ofrenda as cultural art. What was once a humble household table became a carefully crafted altar of identity. Photographs of grandparents stood beside sugar skulls, candles, and favorite foods. Even Coca-Cola bottles and radios appeared because, as one grandmother in Puebla once said, if they loved it in life, they must love it in heaven. In the 1970s and 80s, the world began to take notice. Anthropologists, filmmakers, and travelers wrote of Mexico's beautiful death. They described candlelit cemeteries glowing like golden seas and children, sleeping among graves wrapped in blankets while mariachis played softly through the night. What had begun as a colonial fusion was now recognized as a living art form of faith. Then in 2008, UNESCO declared Dia de Muertos an intangible cultural heritage of humanity. What had once been called superstition had become celebrated as a symbol of Mexico's soul. Yet even as commercialization crept in, the neon skulls, the parades, the costumes, the old heart of the tradition still beat strongest in the villages. In the quiet corners of Latin America, you can still find it. In Michoacán, families decorate cemeteries with orange marigolds, turning the night into a field of stars. In Guatemala, giant kites soar over the hills to carry messages to heaven. In Peru, candles still flicker beside photographs of ancestors lost to cholera, smallpox, or the pandemics of our own time. It is said that when the last candle goes out at dawn, the souls finally rest until next year's whisper calls them again. These traditions have endured colonization, disease, modernization, and even forgetfulness. They have been shaped by sorrow and laughter alike, and perhaps that is their secret. The reason they still matter? For in every candle there is an unbroken link between generations. In every prayer, a defiance against oblivion. Even today, when the night of November 1st arrives, millions across Latin America prepare altars for the return of the souls. They sweep their homes, cook ancestral recipes, and set out small gifts, not for gods or ghosts, but for family. The air fills with the scent of marigolds and wax, of sweetbread and incense. And somewhere between the old colonial bells and the soft hum of modern life, the world of the living and the dead becomes one again. The rituals may look different, some modern, some ancient, but the heart remains the same. A daughter lighting a candle for a mother lost during the pandemic echoes the same love an Aztec priest once felt offering maize to Mictecatzihuatl. A child painting sugar skulls mirrors a centuries-old act of remembrance that refused to die even when empires did. This is the story of Latin America's All Saints. Not forgotten saints, not distant ones, but the ordinary dead who built extraordinary legacies. They are remembered in every flickering flame, every whispered name, every grave kissed by candlelight. And so, as the sun rises on November 2nd and the final candles burn low, a quiet truth lingers over the cemeteries. Death here has never been feared. It has always been understood. Because to remember is to resurrect. And Latin America, through all its centuries, has never stopped doing both.